Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Star Citizen Live, That Vehicle Life 314. I'm your host, Jared Huckabee. And if you've never seen Star Citizen Live before, it's where we take about a week out of the end of our day, take about an hour at the end of our week, and hang out with our developers, chat a little bit, discuss the events of the day, the week, the month, talk a little bit about Star Citizen's development. On the show this week, I've now said week more times in the last 2 minutes than I have in a week. On the show this week, we have got members of our esteemed vehicle experience, vehicle feature, and vehicle tech teams on to discuss changes and features and the experience of flight in the upcoming Alpha 314, which is available for testing on the public test universe right now. So let's take a minute, because every show is somebody's first show. Let's go around the room and introduce everybody who we are. Let's start. Richard, who are you and what do you do for Star Citizen?
So I'm Richard, and I'm the lead game designer on the vehicle experience team. And this is Maggie, who is currently fussing me.
This is the first time
my legs apart.
This is the first time Maggie's got an introduction.
It is.
Hi, Maggie. David, who are you and what do you do for Star Citizen?
I'm David Colson. I'm the lead vehicle programmer in the EU, basically Mark's EU counterpart, I guess. I look after the EU programmers making vehicle features.
Right. And you still have your Star Wars poster is currently hanging on the wall instead of.
It's actually a little off.
Yeah.
It's like not
so
quite
are you,
straight,
so.
but well, thanks.
Yogi, who are you and what do you do for Star Citizen?
Yeah, my name is Yogi Klatt, and I'm a senior gameplay programmer on the vehicle experience team, focusing on a lot of space combat. And I don't have a cat.
But you do have a flight suit.
I do have a flight suit. It's right here. It's not ready though. It's missing a few patches, but yeah, not ready.
I can hook you up. I've got a giant wall in the other room full of patches. So, and last but certainly not least, the bug smasher himself, Mark Abent. Who are you and what do you do for Star Citizen?
Hello, I'm Mark Abent. I'm a lead vehicle engineer at the LA studio, basically a counterpart to what David does in the EU. And I'm also known as the infamous bug smasher, and I'm trying to pass on the title to Yogi because he keeps smashing crazy bugs as well. And this week of the week, we're doing vehicle fun.
This week of the week, we're doing vehicle fun.
I just want to put in week somehow.
I've only been doing this for the better part of a decade. You'd think I'd be actually good, but no.
This week
all right.
We're good.
So this week we are. So this episode, we are talking exclusively about Alpha 314, which is currently available for PTU. I know lots of folks have questions about the future, what you're going to do, next and stuff like this. I just want to preface that we do have a little thing called CitizenCon coming down the pipeline. So a lot of conversation of the future of Star Citizen and everything is being saved for that major event coming in October. So if we understand that you have lots of exciting questions about what's next for Star Citizen. Rest assured, we'll get to those in short order. But today we are talking about in Alpha 314. So if you're watching live on twitch.tv, you can submit your questions with the word question in capital letters surrounded by brackets. That'll help us pull it out from the chat. And of course, we threw up the thread in Spectrum, our bespoke communication platform on robertspaceindustries.com, and started collecting questions there all week. So we're going to begin with those. And right off the bat, a not insignificant amount of questions had to do with weapon ranges, which have seemed to change fairly dramatically in Alpha 314. So right off the bat, let's just start with a general question, and we'll get into the more detailed ones that came from the thread. What has happened in 314 to weapon ranges? What has changed? Let's just start there. Separate the fact from the fiction. What has actually changed in 314?
Okay, I'll take this one. So 3.14 does a massive change in the overall combat system, and the thing which we always wanted to do and which we now are starting to do is to give every item, every ship, and every weapon a dedicated purpose. right? We do not want these items to be just interchangeable. There needs to be proper pros and cons. But this is a very complex balancing process. So to start with that balance process, we categorized the weapons in different, we created different weapon categorizations. The first thing we split up was the size 1 to 4 weapons from the size 5+ weapons, mainly because those weapons are typically employed by fighters. Whereas size 5+, except for some cases like the Vanguard, are typically carried by heavier ships, right? But the focus in 3.14 was on the small fighters. And within those weapons, we also then separated the fast-firing weapons, which we consider anti-fighter weapons, versus the slow-firing weapons, which are mainly cannons. The difference we did there was to check, hey, what are the ranges in which we want these weapons to be actually employed, right? Most of the combat between two ships happens within roughly 1,200 meters when you talk about fast-firing weapons. So extending these ranges a lot didn't really bring us any more benefits. Then we also tweaked the cannons to be the heavy hitters, not necessarily just by damage, but also by their efficiency. So you can, together with a new capacitor system, you can now use cannons to dish out a longer, continuous high DPS stream, as opposed to the weapons which are meant for fighters. Because in fighter gameplay, we do not really want to see the situation where you just tape down the fire button and then just like fire and fire and fire without any consequences. So for those anti-fighter weapons, they will empty their ammo load a lot faster to enforce the player to pick carefully when they actually want to employ them. So and this is like the story why we actually placed them out that much. That doesn't mean though that they're going to stay as they are, right? So at the moment we have like all the weapons in these categories are pretty similar to each other. There will be different again in the future, but we have to we can't do all at once, right? So for us, it was important to first set up the framework and then do the differences again. And this is what we're doing with the weapon ranges in 3.14. And
just so is ship balancing something that can be done in a single quarter?
I mean, I'm gonna say no, because it's quite a lot of work, and especially with 3.14, we've changed a lot. So we've had to kind of reset some things to bring not only the weapons and everything, but the ships together in a setting where that kind of resets things for us. So the ships are a lot closer in performance. But as you said, our plan isn't just to keep it like this. Our plan is to discover, what our new features mean for the game. Because we can test things as much as we want, but it's got to get in the players' hands, and then we can see what happens as the players make choices. And then basically it's how their choices influence the results of that. So if they pick certain weapon loadouts, or pick certain ships at certain times, we can figure out and we can see patterns in this, and that will shape the balance of the weapons and the ships going forwards. But it's really difficult to kind of balance all this in one kind of quarter. So we've kind of done it in stages where we're happy with the framework we have now, but I wouldn't say we're happy with the finer details within the balance because we're still figuring it out. So that's going to come over several releases, but it isn't something we're just going to stop now and go, that's it. We've got a dedicated team now to kind of do this over every single release going forward.
Gotcha. So this is an intentional thing to kind of draw things back to a simpler state and then start to build them back out over subsequent patches. It sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Okay.
The cool thing too is as Rich and them are balancing stuff, they have a lot of analytical events that they research and look at to see what's happening throughout the entire PUAC. So, the one thing we always see a lot too is particular thread or something like that. They say that they're seeing a certain experience, which might be true in that certain circumstance, but we also have a lot of analytical events that happen throughout. So Rich could see like the bigger picture of what's going on, that maybe that little small thing is something much bigger that's happening. And they do a lot of looking at and data analysis to kind of see, how should the balance go and where it's going right now. And there's always those fun players that are exploiting certain things. And it's like, how in the world did they do that? Oh.
All right. So how do you work if you can't do this all at once. Like knowing that you can only put out part of the picture this patch, and then part of the picture next patch, and then part of the picture the patch after that. What are the benefits and drawbacks to this approach? How does this approach help you? How does this approach make your life more difficult?
It makes our life a little bit easier in terms of basically understanding the changes we've made to the game in terms of the feature set. So the big change for 3.14 is we've got a brand new combat system where you can put balancing your shields, weapons, and thrusters, and that's a new system. So basically going backwards a little bit helps us understand how that system is influencing the game. Rather than being bothered about how it works on the individual ships as much and being cut out by kind of tuning it to a certain ship or not, we get to see an overall experience of what this has added to the game. And then we can look at it from an experience point of view and go, right, what does this feature allow us to do on this ship, on that ship? And where does that ship need to fit? Because we've done a rough guide of where the ships fit, but until we see it in the combat situation, until we see all the ships fighting each other and the different weapons, the different missiles and torpedoes all come together in terms of combat, we don't really know because there's so much to test. There's so many ships in the game. So many...
Worth pointing out as well that we also don't want to kind of leave the game in a not very fun state while we're working on it. Like, we are still operating a live game, and even though it's alpha, we ideally want each patch to be fun. So we're not going to intentionally do something wrong that's going to make it not fun now in preparation for something in the future. We still kind of want to give it the best representation we can in this patch. And it just so happens, I think, especially in the case of 3.14, that making the game fun for this particular feature set that we have now also helps us understand the features that we have changed for this release, which is what Rich and Yogi are after.
Gotcha. Let me see if there's more before we move on from weapon ranges. So as far as the ranges, how do you intend to solve? How do you intend to address what's currently one of the not side effects but effects of the new weapon ranges, and that large ships are less capable of defending themselves against fighters with these shorter ranges? Well,
that problem existed before already, right? Because a large ship like a Hammerhead cannot just evade the bullets. It has to tank the damage one way or another. But that specific use case actually came out of the playtest. Like, we didn't see that in our internal tests but then the behavior of kiting the ships at a large range and just like trying to avoid the shots that way while still keeping the firing forward is something that we honestly didn't see before, right? It might sound odd, but it was like that. So we tried to counter that by reducing the range of the heavy hitters to meaning the cannons, like the ones which have like a shorter range now, to allow the fighters to get into range and take down the Hammerhead faster, right? Though I would still argue that it's not the range that is effectively defining how well a Hammerhead can defend itself. It's always the projectile velocity, right? And it came up in the feedback that the Hammerhead was supposed to get weapons with projectiles that just fly fast and thus give the ship a better chance to hit attacking fighters, right? We actually wanted to try that out, but the weapon system cannot do this at the moment. Like, we can change the properties of a weapon contextually, but we cannot change the properties of the projectile. So once that kind of tag has been built in, we can reevaluate that thing. But for 3.14, it was not possible to address. That being said, we would still see any kind of gun gameplay as like short range gameplay, right? Short range gameplay. And we do have missiles for medium and long range gameplay, right? But it can be argued that there could be that, like, looking forward, we can also implement other kinds of weapons which are more effective and well beyond the close range area.
There's also once we get physicalized damage, things are going to change a bit. Where the hammerhead's going to be, like as you're saying, more of a tank, where it could take more of an impact. It has much more thicker armor that the physicalized damage is just not going to be able to penetrate as well as the guns that it's shooting onto fighters. So right now, it's probably going to be mostly just a health pool. While in the future, when physicalized damage comes apart, it's going to be a different type of game. It's where velocity and the projectile masses will take more of an account, and you're going to see a different dynamic with that. But that's also going with what Dave was saying earlier. We're adding these incremental changes to get to where we want to go, and we don't want to just throw everything all at once and unbalancing the game all there. We're adding little bits of changes to see how well it affects the gameplay and getting player feedback to change some things with the analytical data.
You mentioned the physicalized damage. There are several questions in both the live chat and the Spectrum about won't all this work have to be redone when armor comes online, physical damage comes online?
I mean, that's the beauty of Star Citizen. You balance for the tech that we have now, and you anticipate the tech we'll have in the future. It's the same issue that we have with a bunch of other systems. We can't build, the damage and the balance for tech that it's not ready for the live game. So while internally we're preparing for all that stuff and having a lot of discussions and testing a lot of philosophies, it will have to get changed once we get to that point. But we're already having discussion internally on what that means. So it's like when we had a more recent one, the shield tech, where it was using SDFs. We rolled that out for a few different ships, and the community actually found some loopholes and bugs with it. We kind of want to do that with physicalized damage too. Once we get to that point, is we roll it out, see what impact that has, and then make balance changes when it gets to there. But yes, it will definitely change the game, and I know Rich is looking forward to it. A lot of work. Yes.
yeah. It's definitely, it is definitely a big challenge to keep on top of a live product. As I say, but also think of what's coming in the future and how we get to where we're going to be in the future. But the two do kind of align because we're always thinking about it, which does make it difficult sometimes, kind of explaining to the players again that we've done this for a reason and we've done this in anticipation, or we've done this because this is what we have in the game currently, but it will change. And it is difficult keeping on top of that, but it keeps me on my toes and it keeps the team on our toes. So it's part of the enjoyment, really. Because we're always moving the tech forwards, so it's always going to change. And for me, that's a really great part of Star Citizen is the tech's always getting better.
Yeah. Let's move on to some weapon-specific questions that aren't exactly range-related. There have been a number of changes to ballistic weapons in 3.14. Before we dive into the smaller changes, let's just talk about the actual role of ballistics versus energy. Have they changed? Are they the same as they've always been?
They pretty much haven't changed. I mean, the balance has changed, right? But the function and the way that we intend for them to work hasn't really changed. Like the idea pretty much has been all along that ballistics are not like, oh, they only work against, the hull of the ship or something. Isn't quite true. Like the shield is taking away some of the stopping power of ballistic ammo through absorption. But they still will then go through and attack the actual hull, even if you have a shield up, which is how it's always been. We've changed some of this a little bit, which maybe Yogi knows a little bit more of the detail of what's happening there. But that's largely the idea. So the ballistics then become obviously very desirable, right? Because they can damage the hull, even though you have a shield up. But obviously a lot of work has happened in this patch to make ballistics this significantly more valuable thing, where the ammo is much lower, and they run out really quickly and they don't regen in the same way that energy weapons do. But that's kind of the trade-off, right? You can do loads of effective damage to a ship with ballistic guns, but you don't have this this cool feature with energy weapons that you can regen the ammo, which is why they're, how we're trying to balance this.
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm getting a mess. I got a message from our IT folks. Our LA office, where I'm currently at right now, is experiencing an internet issue. Perforce is down and stuff, so they're about to switch over to a backup internet. I'm still online, but we may
You're
lose
still good.
connectivity. So if the stream goes down, folks, we'll pop back up momentarily, hopefully. Why were magazine sizes reduced so much for ballistic weapons in 314?
That is mostly down to the role we want to see in ballistics. I mean, the purpose of ballistics was always to feel limited but powerful. And in 3.13, we didn't really have that. Ballistics were practically just cannons, which looked and sounded a bit different compared to laser weapons or energy weapons. I mean, they had like fire times of several minutes, right? And it comes back to the thing that David said before, like we want to give these things purpose. And the specific issue that we had in 3.14 was that was the length of a continuous fire stream which you could put out, which was always much more powerful than the energy cannons, which had natural fire pauses because they needed to regenerate. But that offset was very, very large still. And even when we equalized the DPS outputs of energy repeaters versus ballistic weapons just to see how they would perform, the ballistics were still a lot more powerful because they could retain, like they could keep up this weapon stream, right? And at the moment, we do not have any other ways to force a break in that fire pattern. So for that reason, we harshly limited the ammo and also upped the damage quite a lot to force players to make very conscious choices about when to employ those weapons.
There's one extra point I forgot to mention about ballistics, which maybe we shouldn't go into too much detail on, but Mark mentioned the physicalized damage. When that comes along, ballistics rolls will change. And obviously certain ships that have very high armor will then be much more resilient to ballistics than they are now, right?
So so there's more work we want to do on them to make them feel different in the future, but everything will make more sense once the physicalized armor system is in. But for now, we're happy in terms of like where it gives us, where it brings us in terms of like weapon versus ship balance.
Okay. What about things like reloading? If the ammo counts are going to be so low, is there some kind of change to reloading coming?
Not in 3.14, but that is something we're going to talk about after 3.14.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Have you considered reducing the amount of shield damage that ballistics do in exchange for higher hull damage? I think that's probably because of the big 3-second takedown builds that we're seeing people just alpha striking with Gatlings and.
Yeah, though that doesn't. So, firstly, that kind of approach is contradicting what we want and the general idea of like energy weapons versus ballistics. But the other part of that is that our weapons, they do not have a shield damage property. It's the other way around. Our shields have a damage type property, and every weapon dishes out damage of a certain type, right? Can be distortion, can be physical, energy, and there's a couple of others. And a shield has absorption and resistance values that counter that. So even if we wanted to do that, we couldn't do it right away. So this is nothing we can do for 3.14.
There's also coming along, which we want to do and talk about more, probably that's another point with the physicalized damage, is our ship destruction is kind of arcadey still. Everyone knows it. I mean, we had it since like the first AC. You hit the health pool of a critical part and the ship's dead. And I'm sure CR has also mentioned many times in the past, we don't want that. We want it where you could damage certain sections and the ship could still be functional, but it doesn't just die. So we've also been talking for other systems like insurance and that, what does it mean that we indicate that a ship is in a bad state? Maybe all the power plants are gone or certain parts of the wing just make it inoperable. So you can now have to, the ship is basically dead, but not dead. So once we get more aligned on what those critical areas are, we could reduce the arcadey death explosion and that will get rid of those instant build where you just ram a bunch of health and then it dies. So the problems that we're seeing now are going to be different problems in the future. It's just those things that we keep repeating too. It's those incremental steps to get us there.
That is quite a meme answer. The problems we're seeing now will be different problems in the future.
Welcome to programming.
I want to see that quote next to Mark Abent's face on my Twitter before the show is done. Please.
There's going to be at least 10 of them.
There was a question in the chat about the hammerhead and why the ammo is linked specifically to the guns and not like the overall turret, because something like the poor hammerhead is going to have like, I don't know, 20, 24 guns around it, and they said like cries in Perseus. Why is this tied to the guns and not the turrets?
This is just because we can't do it any other way at the moment. But this comes back to the discussion or to the question we had before. We'll talk about these things in 3.14. But specifically for that reason, we swapped out most of the loadouts of the ships to have at least 50% energy weapons, and only a fraction of them actually has ballistic weaponry on board. But obviously that is the case, right? If I'm flying in a huge capital ship, then of course it makes more sense if we can dish out a lot more of ballistic rounds. But yeah, at the moment,
to be clear,
doesn't work.
When we say like we can't do it, it just means that the system right now needs reworking to do that, and we, for this release, say lack the time to actually do that.
Yeah, as is a common refrain, even with 700 folks around the world, all working in different areas on different aspects of the game, there are only so many things you can work on at any given time. So, let's do our last ballistic ammo question and get off the ballistic topic. Why does ballistic ammo have range in space? Shouldn't they travel at the same speed, onward and onward and onward, until they eventually hit something?
So there's multiple things there, right? First of all, I would draw the game card. If we had unlimited ballistic ammo ranges, you could sit at 20 kilometers away from a hammerhead and just kill it, right there, like given enough time. That's not fun, and there's not a lot of you can do to counter that, right? The second thing is, if it just keeps traveling forever, you get into a situation where you need to track all these bullets on the client and the server. And given how big our fire rates are sometimes, it just wouldn't be maintainable. It would be very expensive. I mean, this is again like the real world question. Also in the real world, there's a lot of ammunition that has an integrated timer, so it blows up after having flown for 3 or 4 seconds, just to not having some bullets hitting a poor guy on the street somewhere else, right? So I think it is okay just to go for the gamey part here.
I imagine there's also got to be some the physics system, if it had to track every bullet that was ever fired infinitely across the entire system, that would cause some unnecessary.
That's primarily why we had a lifetime, was Arena Commander 1. You could blame me.
It's like, yeah, it's not worth the additional desync that would cause. We have enough desync as it is. Let's talk scanning, Mark. Currently, there are no downsides to sending out a ping. Is this intended?
This is not intended. Going back to what David was saying earlier, are doing incremental changes to not completely break the game. The primary big changes that we've done with radar scanning for 3.14 is to move it off of being vehicle-centric and make the system work with any generic entity that design wants. So the shift between 3.13 and 3.14 was to move the system over to that new system while trying to keep it very intact to what players originally had. Fundamentally, the system has a huge overhaul that exposes a lot of things for design to change and fluctuate and add things. It's just we didn't add extra things in there because of time and because of balancing. So eventually, yes, we'll be able to add and incorporate other aspects into it.
You got to get that Crimson Tide, Hunt for Red October, sending a ping out,
Yes.
also makes you visible to other people,
Well,
kind of thing there.
There was something we were trying to get in for 314, but it wasn't going to make it last minute. We're calling it, I think we called it before, signature deltas, where when certain emissions come on the ship, we categorize them to help the player understand what's happening. One of those is ping, and then quantum, and then even like EMP. It's enough EM and IR or is getting emitted out of this object. We classify it somehow, and we didn't get the system in time for 314. But when you emit a ping, the concept is it generates a lot of EM and IR, so that not only do you get to see things when you ping out, but other people get to see that maybe you're pinging out, or there's a contact pinging in that area. So you kind of expose yourself a bit when you ping out. There's other thing that we didn't get to is power requests. Certain ships might require more power when they do a ping, and just balance, we haven't gotten there. Poor Rich has actually, I think, a change list to balance all the EM and IR signatures, but it's just one of those things where we don't want to shove too much into a patch and completely change too many things until we've tried it out and rolled it, little bits and pieces of it out.
Yeah. A follow-up ping question. Is the intended design to be manual single pings only? I mean, you got that thing from,
Yes.
one ping only from Hunt for October. It's great. But folks have started to ask about whether they can set intermittent pings or regularly ping every 5 minutes or whatever, stuff like that.
The intended design was always, of course, that you hit a button and then the action happens. However, like some other systems that we've had, when we change ping to always happen rather not in scan mode, the community comes back with feedback that they would like to improve the game. So I actually just had this conversation with the radar team before this meeting, and even Yogi brought it up with myself, I think a day or two earlier. It's like, even if we don't add the button to repeatedly action, players will just make scripts to automatically do that. So we might as well incorporate that. So we literally just got the approval to add that to our backlog, to add that to the feature. So yes, we're going to do that at some point. Okay. I mean, players will just do it anyway, so might as well add the support.
Keep referencing Crimson Tide and Hunt for October. I'm like, what? K-19 Widowmaker never gets any submarine movie love.
But I mean, you could do it. Just be cautious that once we get the signature deltas in, you're going to be exposing yourself more frequently now that other people could see your ping.
Hope you understand, Jared, that all your movie references is going over my head.
Yeah, I know.
I was like, movie? Yeah, I heard that before.
Are gas clouds a good place to hide because of the new cross-section signatures or environmental concealments?
In 314, we didn't get a chance to add ambient areas into the environment, but we're hoping to do that in the next patch or two, or at least roll out different areas. We have the room system, and the room system could do things like pressure, air, and heat. It also could add ambient values into the scene. So you could design could set up, a space station like Port Olisar to have ambient on the outside and a different ambient on the inside. So we have that system fully fleshed out. We just haven't put it in to the verse for players just yet. It didn't make 314, but we're hoping to roll out ambient in other areas. Yes.
I completely forgot U-571, Faded to Funk. It did have Bon Jovi in it. Let's talk about some general
I know some of those words.
Let's talk about some general ship balancing stuff here, because that's such a big part of 314. In general, how would you say it's going? Are you happy where 314 currently is? We just talked about how it's the next step in a series of steps that'll come patch after patch after patch. But did you get where you wanted to get to in 314? Be honest. Where are we at?
I think we always want to make it perfect. That's the problem. Is we'd love it to go out in a place where we go, right, we nailed it, but I don't think we have. But that's part of it being it's a very complex game to balance. This isn't just moving a few things and the numbers work out and then the balance works. There's so many different systems and so many different things. Even having a different amount of thrusters on the ship, or there being in a different location, or a different power plant setup, or a different cooler setup, can really affect where that ship fits. So even though the numbers look right, until it goes in the game and it fits everything else, it's really hard to know where that ship fits. So I'd say we're pretty happy that we don't think particularly broken the balance of the game, which is basically what we said before. We wanted this release to go out where we really haven't done anything majorly wrong and broken everything, and it creates a foundation. But I wouldn't say we're really happy with how each individual ship fits or how each individual component or kind of weapon fits yet. We've still got a lot of work to do on that. But as far as the foundation goes, I think we're pretty happy. But I said, we'd love it to be perfect, but it takes a lot of time to do this, and a lot of testing as well. And that's a really big part of what we do. There's a lot of testing, and then we can look at the data to back up some of the feedback we get and everything. So it takes a long time to kind of get together and just figure everything out, because there's so many systems that come together to create what that ship is in the game as well. And it goes for the radar and scanning system as well. We've got a lot of intended balance for that, and that requires every single component on every single ship to be set up, how it's intended to be, and that's also just not the case right now. But we've been building a team to kind of do this, so there's lots of stuff to do, and we're cracking on with it.
A couple questions in the chat about time to kill. Is there do you have a specific number you work towards? How do you figure out time to kill and whether whether it's the items that are getting you where you need to be in the right amount of time, or whether it's the skill of the player? Talk to me about time to kill and how the hell you guys work with this idea of how long it should take you to kill a ship.
Okay, so in general, from the feedback in our combat test, what we had before 3.14, the perceived time to kill was always too long for us, right? Because you could tape your fire button down and fire forever, and eventually ships will explode. But it was not really meaningful. I think giving an exact time to kill set is not really working, because you cannot really measure it properly, right? Combat is very dynamic, and how a pilot flies his ship, like if he makes a left barrel roll, or if it takes other maneuvers into his use, the overall time to kill changes so much based on the individual pilot. Like this, it's not really useful for us, right? And also, the other thing with exact time to kills is that it kind of tells you, hey, you have an exact number you're aiming for? And I would say no, right? Because if you just look at numbers and then you have tools that data mine the game data and trying to draw strategies out of that, it's this is something we would like to avoid. We want to avoid the gameplay of building a meta build that will always be better than all other builds combined, right? So as such, for us, it's not important to get an exact number, but rather to experience how these ships and fighters and shields, how they feel. And if you as a player think they give you the advantage that you need, right? Because ultimately we want to play a game and not read out an Excel sheet. Yeah. So yeah, that's why we do not have a time to kill, a specific time to kill. We roughly know where we would want it to be, but this is some data we really don't want to give out, because we want people to enjoy it and tell us, hey, this is too long, this is too short, and then we adapt it accordingly. So yeah.
I think it's also, I would add that as we improve the actual flight, experience, as in moving your ship around in combat, we want to head toward a situation, which I think we've done a pretty good job in this patch, where It's not a DPS race of just hold your gun down and then eventually the ship explodes. And so the result is that, particularly in this patch and going forward, combat is not like about waiting for the health to go to zero or something, right? Like you could, like back, a simple naive way of doing it is like, oh, you hold down your button and then the ship blows up. And in the older patches, that was like 2 seconds. But the actual experience, like what Yogi is saying, when you actually have a fight with a real person, it doesn't feel like 2 seconds. And that issue is much more magnified in this patch, which is why this is the way the way we plan to do it.
And of course, we're using the phrase "time to kill," but with physicalized damage and armor and stuff, at some point it's going to morph into a time to disable, I suppose, would be a more appropriate term.
Yeah.
Well, it also depends what you're targeting too, because now you have sub-targeting and more items are getting physicalized. If you want to just kill the ship, maybe you aim at the power plant and it blows up.
Right.
If you want to disable it, you shoot out the thrusters, and then if you want to just disable the guns, maybe shoot out the guns. It's going
The
to
definition of a win is different.
Yes.
It can be different.
Yeah.
Yogi, you mentioned us not necessarily wanting to give out specific time to kill numbers and stuff. There was a question in the thread about whether we'll ever create a tool to view the health of ship components, like to basically scan your own ship and come up with an overall like health number of the ship and be like, this is where my ship is. What's your view on that? Because I think I know what it is. That's why I'm asking.
Well, it still emphasizes like or a tool like that would actually emphasize the thing we want to avoid, which is like building a meta gameplay, right? Like we do not want players to say, okay, if I add this part and this part and this part and this part, I have 20,000 HP together, right? But those 28,000 HP, they give you no idea what the actual effective HP of a ship is. So even if we had this tool, it wouldn't be like, we wouldn't want it to be an effective thing in your decision making, right? I mean, if you buy a car, maybe you look in how fast it can go, but you're not really interested in the exact number, right? You're interested in how it handles, if it's safe, how many airbags it has, right? But you do not care about, hey, it has a top speed of 260.5 kilometers per hour. You do not care about, hey, the frame will kind of like dissolve itself when you crash it with that much velocity into a wall or something, right? It's always about the experience, and like I would like to avoid that kind of thinking that you kind of like just add up numbers, right? I mean, Star Citizen is not an RPG where you do that, right? It's supposed to be a believable gameplay simulation / experience, and as such, I would like to de-emphasize the kind of just pure number thinking and more go to the experiential view of things. That said, we actually do not have a tool ourselves to actually display all the data. Sometimes it would actually be useful, but at the moment, sometimes we actually have to draw the data out of XML tools.
There's also, on top of us wanting it to be experiential, there's a lot of subtlety to the combat system that makes giving numbers actually quite hard. Like a really good example that we have had is that a certain fighter could have like, I don't know, let's say 50,000 hull damage, right? Or hull HP points. But it has like, say, a wing or some other part that's extending out and it has thrusters on the end of it. You could, for example, break that part off without dealing all of the HP damage and have effectively nullified the effectiveness of that ship, which makes the actual like HP, for example, not actually that representative of what fighting that ship is truly like. And that subtlety is not captured in just straight numbers.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to challenge you guys a little bit.
Oh yeah, fair, go ahead.
Meta, every MMO in the universe has a meta. Gear score hits every MMO at some point. Whether the developers make it or the players make their tools, like the thing that Urkul has and stuff like this. I understand where you guys are coming from and what you guys want. You want to build a more experiential type of thing rather than just everybody opens up a spreadsheet, opens up a website, and just builds the same meta build. And everybody's just flying the same homogeneous meta builds. And there's no variety out there. I get what the intention is. Do you think you're working against what comes naturally to players?
I think, like, what a desirable experience. Like, yes, there is meta, right? And I think we're not necessarily working against that, because the players can still play the game and figure out the meta and make their own notes about it and try and learn about the game by playing it to then decide on what the meta is. And like an ideal situation is, a group of players play and they find that a certain configuration of components like works really well. And then a different group of players, start from a different starting point and discover that actually a different, set of components is better. And that kind of like variety in the community, that's desirable, right? And you're not going to get that by the game giving you just hard numbers. You're going to get that from people like trying to learn about the game and quantify it, and then having disagreements and discussion about it. That's what we really want.
I get you. I get you. It's the difference between us just handing everything on a silver platter and being like, this is your meta build and you're done, and letting the community make their own decisions, make their own deductions, whether they're correct or not.
Yes.
One other aspect of this too is going to be more, it's like with scanning. Depending upon what you want to do, we're going to have different scanners give you different information. If you're a mining or a prospector or something like that, the scan that you're going to get on another ship is maybe not what its guns are. Maybe it's not any good information about combat. Whereas a fighter ship when you scan something, it's going to tell you how combat ready that is against you. Whereas a more security ship is going to want to scan and give you maybe how much bad cargo that you have in there. So it also depends on what we want to give the players when you scan and what information to give based on the role of that particular ship or what they're trying to get at. A medical scanner is going to give you something different than someone who just wants to blow stuff up. If you go in the game and you just want to blow a bunch of things up, eventually the idea is you're going to run out of money. If you blow up a cargo or a prospector up that has a bunch of valuable cargo, you just lost it all. You want to disable that ship and maybe capture it, but that's going to make that prospector maybe call in his friends. So a lot of it right now is how can you get away from just making the gameplay blow people up? How do you incorporate different information so that the different gameplay aspects could come out of it?
I get you. We're trying for something. I don't think it's any surprise that we're trying for something more. We're trying than the standard MMO out there, and I think it's admirable that we're working towards it, and I sincerely hope we succeed.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get the people that just want to blow stuff up, but if you repeatedly do that, how are you going to get money to continue to blow some people up?
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What else do we have? Do G-forces still play a role in balanced decisions?
Yes, absolutely. We also have a change list that brings the tolerances back because especially eyes out G-forces, like going backwards and going downwards, is something that humans cannot endure for long. So most of the ships have already been balanced to allow less downward accelerations and backward accelerations than on the other axes. But we did not have enough time to actually tweak the G-force tolerances yet. So we're planning this to do in the future, which again will then change a little bit the combat geometry when between fighters.
Okay. We've only got like 10 minutes to go, and I realize that I have not asked you about capacitors yet, Yogi.
Okay.
We're going to jump into capacitors here. We did a segment on ISC a couple months ago about capacitors, and they've gone through some changes since then. Yogi and I actually recorded a whole Calling All Devs about the changes, and then they changed again after the thing, so we never aired it.
That was fun, man.
It was a really good episode, actually. It was really fun. We had space helmets and our flight suits and everything. It was delightful. And then like right before it aired, the plan changed again. We're like,
One day.
all right, so that's out. I'm really glad we didn't air that. Talk to us about where capacitors are now in 314.
Okay, so the role of the capacitors has slightly changed since we had this first ISC, and like there was a lot of feedback from the community. There was a lot of feedback from Chris actually on how to make them better, and we try to incorporate this all. So the thing is, like, we do not have like a separate capacitor item or something like that. Like every subsystem for weapons, shields, and thrusters have their own idea and implementation how capacitor gameplay, which is like roughly translates to stamina gameplay, is implemented, right? The most well-developed part is, I think, the weapon system. So when you have energy weapons on board, they on their own, they cannot even fire, even when they're powered, because now they need some kind of like, energy ammo. That kind of ammo is being supplied by a weapon capacitor item that is on the ship itself. So it's an item that's on the ship, and it has X amount of a thing we call ammo load, which is practically the amount of damage weapons can do, and it has an X amount of regen. So once this item goes online, right? So at the moment you cannot power it on or off, but it goes online, it will start supplying the weapons with the juice, right? So, and then the weapons, based on their requests that they're requesting from the system, will get a slice of the ammo load and the regen cake. And this also means if you, for example, have 2 laser repeaters and 1 laser cannon, what you can do is, in order to increase the output of your laser cannon, you can turn off the repeaters, and then all the juice from the repeaters will go into the cannon, and this will then just to allow you to keep a longer fire stream, and you will also see that you have more shots in the cannon for, just more shots in the cannon. Now, this is all coupled with the power triangle. So if you put full juice with the power triangle towards the weapons, you will see that the weapon capacitor will now just, or the item on the ship will now just be able to output a little bit more. So you will see the ammo count and your energy weapons actually going up. And also the regeneration will be faster, right? So that's the weapon part. Then we have this on the shields. On the shields, when you assign more energy to your via the power triangle, they will regenerate faster, but you will also get a little bit more resistance in them. Not a lot, but just enough to give you a little bit of an edge when you need to fly defensive and need to recover in some other ways, right? And for the thrusters, we have a similar system there. So on the thrusters, we have now a limited capacitor pool for which we're going to use with boost, which was afterburner before. Now we call it boost. And the more assignment you put on your thrusters, the faster this boost will regenerate, and the more assignment you have will also make it a little bit more efficient. So you use less the longer you use it. That said, I don't think this is the last iteration of the capacitor gameplay. I think we will iterate on this because, especially for the shields, for example, there's more stuff we'd like to do with that in the future. But this is where we are right now.
Okay. I know that when we talked during ISC, the capacitors were not a physicalized item on the ship. Is that still the case? This question comes from a Risk Roberts.
Okay, so physicalized. So at the moment not, because the items which we would build into the ships, they haven't been like set up to be measured and try to be fit into the ship. So at the moment not, but specifically the weapon parts, we would like to, like, because it's an actual separate item that powers all the weapons. This is a thing we would like to swap out and turn on and off in the future separately. And so practically the idea is, if this thing goes offline or if you turn it off, all your energy weapons will stop working. So as in physicalized, I don't know yet. This is more like a question for John in the future.
Just for the benefit of someone who might not understand, by physicalized, Jared, you mean that the capacitor has an actual interactable object that you can see in the ship, right?
An object that can be swapped out, upgraded, damaged.
So the thing to keep in mind is that even though right now it is not a physicalized object, because we need to work very heavily with the content teams to actually modify ships and so on to do that, it is still an item, even though it may not have a representation. So we still do have the ability to swap it out and upgrade it and so on, which we haven't done for this patch, but we do have the ability to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a proper item with pipes and everything.
Cool. All right, let's go back to some general stuff before we run out of time here. Do you think shield hardening would still be around if more people could use it via hotkeys rather than just the MFD?
It's a very suggestive question, isn't it?
No, I usually avoid these ones that try to TV sitcom and answer into their question, but I like this one. So.
Okay, so specifically on the shield hardening, like when we had our combat summits, like we had a couple of them now, it was always the thing that we don't really think that shield hardening as it was implemented in the past is really interesting, because it's just an on-off button and it doesn't give you really meaningful differences. So in 3.14, shield hardening is disabled and removed. What we would like to do in the future is just to supply a more interesting implementation of that, but that's also for the future.
Okay. What about profiles for the capacitors that folks can load up with keys?
Yeah, so that was a really good idea, and it's already tasked up, but I don't know when. Okay. So it's somewhere in the task list. So not for 3.14.
Okay. This one just says the saber flies bad. That's not a I don't think that's a question. They just say the saber
Rich,
flies
that's
bad.
all you.
Yeah, Rich, go on.
Why do you hate the saber, Richard?
Yeah, that's all my fault. So that's one of those ones where we've taken the saber and we've gone, right, we think the saber fits here. But again, that's not final balance. I could have pushed it too far in that bad zone where it doesn't fit quite right. But that's where we can react to this and we can work on that in the future. But it would just move back to a baseline that we thought would work for the ship. But it's where one of the ships that hasn't quite fitted where we thought it would fit. So we can definitely look at some changes because I think it's got quite a weak yaw compared to where it should be. But that's also a consequence of the way the ship is as well. But we can work with that and we can definitely improve it.
One thing also to indicate too is like, if the saber's bad, it would also be really, really nice to know why it's bad. We see this a lot on the forums and that. It's like someone says, this is broken, this is bad, if you can provide extra bit of detail, that would actually really help us understand why you think it's bad. Any bit of context other than the word it's bad. Now, given there might be a chance that there's a bug and it's bad in the case that it doesn't fly, that I get. But any extra input on why you think it's bad, please put it in there. Because when we scroll through the forums and that, any extra bit of information helps us gather and build why a certain thing is the way it is.
Yeah, and also it's not just a question of it being bad in flight, because as a comparison, it could maybe have worse flight than a similar ship, but the Sabre could excel in a different area. So that's definitely something we've looked at where we've tried to give ships different reasons, for being, what those ships are. And there's some ships where that's not possible right now, that they fulfill their complete role, I would say. But it's coming.
What if I said the saber flies like you took a pancake and crushed it into a ball and then submerged yourself in water and tried to throw it at a target 20 feet away?
I just can't stop thinking about pancakes.
Whoa.
I just want pancakes now. I'm not sure what you can.
I think Jared likes the saber and he would like some tweaks to it.
Yeah.
I mean, the ships are not being tuned without like some context, right? So specifically for 3.14, we added a couple of measures that tell us, hey, what is like the rough dogfight performance we can expect from that ship. And the Sabre is actually not that bad if we look at the raw numbers. But I get why players don't like it that much. But this is also because the role that the Sabre is supposed to excel at is not very well developed yet. So like, don't melt them down. They will play the role and they will have their proper space in the combat environment going forward.
Yeah, it's I've had some fun at the with some of our guests here today, but it becomes very important to remember that 3.14 is not the end all be all of our ship balance and development. I think Richard said it best early on, and we're wrapping up here, that 3.14 is a new foundation for which to build an entirely new balancing scheme on, and that comes to introducing the various ship archetypes and all kinds of stuff that I imagine you'll probably hear more of in the coming months. But it's for now. Get in there, play, provide your feedback. That's what this experience is for. That's why we have a live game operating in the middle of our development, in the middle of our alpha. It's to get in there, to experience it, we brought it in close. We brought everything in close so that we could start stretching little tiny threads out individually so we don't explode into something that's just jousting back and forth. We don't want to get back to where we're at. So it's a process that takes time. It's a process that will draw out over several patches. And the best way you can help us is to get in there, to play it, and to give us your detailed contextual feedback, as Mark Abent said.
Well,
So-
and I mean, we're human. We will try to do those balance things without doing too much of an impact, but sometimes they happen. And that's why I was also saying before, any extra information you can will help us fix those problems.
Well, you're human. I'm sure Dave Colson is still at least 40% Toblerone.
I think that is
true.
true for reference. Yeah.
This is true.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for taking the time out of your week to be here on the show with us. This was a last minute a pull. Our show was originally supposed to be with a different team, but they had to reschedule because of some off time. So I always appreciate when you guys, come in and face the firing squad, especially on such short notice. So, Rich Towler, Dave Colson, Yogi Klatt, Bug Smasher Mark. I'm Jared. ISC returns next week with an episode about loot generation. Coming to Star Citizen in the future. So stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here next week with another episode of Star Citizen Live. Take care, everybody.
Oh, see ya.
Right.